Our productivity app is going to need to store user accounts. It's going to need to store wiki pages. It's also going to need to store goals and many other things. We can use a Postgres database to accomplish all this. Postgres is a SQL database and is my favorite SQL database. It's open source. It keeps all the data organized. It's really fast to get data back and insert data, and it's also really powerful. All of the code that we're going to do in this video is in the description below. Installing Postgres is pretty similar on both Windows and Mac, so I'll install it on Windows. I'm also going to show you how to install it on Linux as well. Also, the video has timestamps if you want to skip the installation process. Let's get started. To install Postgres on Windows, go ahead and we're going to navigate to the downloads and we'll go to Windows. On their website, we actually want to go to where it says download the installer here. We'll go ahead and click that. And then from there, go ahead and navigate to Windows, and I'm just going to do the latest version. And then that'll download, and we'll go from there. If you haven't installed this, it'll just install that for you. Okay, and then you'll be brought to this screen. We'll go ahead and hit next. Yeah, that's great. Sure, that's great. Yes. Okay, this part's really important. So when you create a password for Postgres, it's almost like creating a password for your computer. It's really not, but it's like for the database. So this password that you create should be something that you remember. It's a little bit of a process if you forget this password. It's not really a fun time. And also create something that you feel comfortable like typing in as a variable later on. We're not going to put it in our code, but we are going to put it in a configuration file that we're not going to commit to GitHub. You can also set these as environment variables too on your computer. So I'll come in here and we'll hit next. 5432 is the standard port for Postgres. We can just leave that. Default locale, that'll just do the culture that you're in. Yep, it will hit next, and we'll hit next, and it will start installing. At the very end, it's going to ask you about the stack builder thing. Just uncheck this and just hit finish. To verify that Postgres installed on Windows, go ahead and just go to the search bar down here and just type PSQL, and then it will start up. Basically, when you connect to a database, not just Postgres, but any sort of database, it's going to ask you 5 different questions. First is the computer that you're connecting to. We're going to do localhost because we're going to connect to our own computer. Basically, when you fill out these questions, this is the default. So if I just hit enter, it'll assume, localhost. Yes, we want to connect to Postgres 5432. The username will be Postgres. Now, the password, this is again where, like I said, it's really, really important that we remember this. I'm going to go ahead and type in the password that we do. Notice when I'm typing, it doesn't actually show up here. So we'll hit it, enter, and bam, now I'm in my database. For Linux, I'm assuming you're using a Ubuntu or Debian-based system. I'll put a link in the description below for some other distributions as well. Let's come in here and we'll update our packages. We'll type in our password. Notice when you type this, it won't show you your password. After that was one, we're going to type the following. There's 2 packages. There's this Postgres one and then the Postgres contribute one. I already have it installed on my machine, but yeah, you'll see that it'll say, however many installed, however many upgraded, etc. To actually start Postgres, go ahead and run the following command. Again, it's already running on my machine, so I'm not going to run it. To actually verify that Postgres installed, go ahead and try to log in. Go ahead and type PSQL, and now you can actually run SQL commands against this. This is a Postgres shell where you can type commands. We're actually not going to use this. We'll type exit, and we'll type exit, and now you're back into your terminal. Now let's jump to VSCode, and we'll connect to our database here. Jumping into VSCode, we'll install the Postgres extension so we can connect to it and run our queries. Let's go ahead and we'll go into extensions and we'll search up Postgres. This is the one that I like as of the recording of this video. And what this will do is this will give you a little elephant icon over here. We'll go ahead and click on that. Inside of here, to connect to your database, you just click this plus button up here. We want to type the host name, which is the computer you're connecting to. We'll connect to our own computer by typing localhost. You want to do the user, which is going to be Postgres. This is sort of the super user of everything. Type the password that you used when you installed Postgres. We'll type the port number, and then we'll use the standard connection. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just select Postgres for now, and then we'll go from there. And if you did it, it should then show Postgres here. There's nothing in here yet because we haven't added anything to our database, but if you got this far, then you connected. If for some reason you get this error down at the bottom, that means that it didn't connect, and it will actually only show you that once you get to 6 of 7. So just because you typed in the password, it asks for the rest of it, but it doesn't mean that it necessarily accepted the password yet. If this is the case, then you didn't type in the correct password. I like to create a separate user when you create a web application. And the benefit of doing this is that you can give that user different permissions. You may not have this liberty on every single Postgres database. Sometimes your provider may only give you one user. But if you've installed Postgres like this, you have full access to it. So we're going to create a new user. Come in here and we're going to go to data and we're going to create a new file called account.sql. To create a new user, type the following. This is the username that you want to use, and then this is the password. You'll type the password here. So we're creating a second user just for this database. Postgres is sort of the administrator user, the super user of everything, and creating a separate user is a secure practice for basically creating your database. That means that in the wild, if somebody were to perhaps compromise this account, they'd only have so much limited access. Now, you may not always have this liberty. Your database provider may only give you one username and that's it. Maybe you can't even create users. But we have full access over our Postgres database, so we're going to come in here and we're going to do that. So go in here, and down at the bottom, you're going to see this little thing. It says select Postgres server. Go ahead and click that. And then we'll click localhost and click Postgres. Perfect. And like you saw, if you have other databases developed as well, you might have other ones. But we'll select the Postgres one. You'll see Postgres down here at the bottom. That's the current database you're using. We're going to come in here. We're going to right-click and run query. And that created a user called productivity with this password. This process seems a bit redundant, and why are we doing this? I just want to use Postgres, but I do want to show you how to do this because this is good practice. Next, we're going to create another SQL script called setup.sql. The idea is we should be able to just run this file and have everything set up if you go to a new machine or whichever. Let's come in here and we'll create our database called productivity. Like we did with the previous one, let's come down here and we'll select the Postgres server. We're going to click localhost and we're going to click Postgres. Then let's come in here, we'll highlight this and we'll right click and run query. You should see null rows created. That means that it successfully did it. And you should get this little query thing here. It'll tell you if it completed. If you have a little red X, that means that it didn't do it correctly. Or a yellow, that means you might need to select the Postgres server. Okay, let's come in here, we'll close this. Now that we've created the database, let's switch to it. Down here, you can change the active database. Let's click that and let's select the new one that we created. Again, you might notice on my machine, I have other databases created, so it'll list every single database that you create. You can make many different databases. Let's jump back to our account.sql. And actually, let's get rid of this. Just again, remember the username and password that you used. We're going to create a table called account. SQL stores everything in tables, and every single account is just a row in the table. Let's go ahead and we'll put our cursor right in the parentheses and hit enter. You need a unique identifier for every single thing in the table. An example of this in real life is a barcode that you would have on every single thing inside of a store. Oreos, right? Every single bag of Oreos has the same barcode, allowing you to basically look up Oreos, right? It's some unique number. We're going to do the same thing for user accounts. We're going to create a primary key that sort of is a unique identifier for every single thing. Postgres, as opposed to other databases, uses this serial type. Serial is really just an integer if you're coming from another database, but the sequence will add by 1 every single time. So the first time you add something in there, it'll be 1. The next time it'll be 2, next time 3, etc. Next, we're going to create a username field, and this is where you get to choose. Varchar means text. So what this is this is the column, And then this is the type. This is what it is. Same thing here. This is the column. It's a username. And then this is the type, right? It's text. Varchar means varying character. So it's basically up to 20 characters of text. What you put in here is the limit of how many characters that you can have. I think that usernames should be limited to 20 characters. I also think that passwords should be limited to 128 characters. That may seem like a lot, but later we're going to encrypt the password, and our encryption method is going to require quite a number of characters. Not necessarily 128, but I do think that 128 is a good number to use for this. Next, we're going to store first names. And again, this is an interesting choice that you have here. What is the maximum characters that somebody can store for their first name? You might want to put, make this number higher and be 50, but you are using more disk space per entry. For little things like this, it may not necessarily matter, but I'm guessing that maybe 25 is a good value for this. But you can choose whichever one you want. Don't make these numbers too big, by the way, because it does correlate with how much disk space that you're using for these. We will actually measure disk space later in these videos. Let's come over here and we'll do the last name as well. I think that's good for this account. Now you might want an email and phone number, going with that as well. You can also use varchar for that as well. And if you're curious, why don't you Google that? What's the maximum number of characters you can put in an email? We need to further constrain this. So some of these things are required. For example, could you have an account that doesn't have a username? Could you have an account that doesn't have a password? I actually think that pretty much all of these are necessary. So because of that, let's sneak our cursor right before the comma there, and we're going to say not null. This right here says that the field is required. You must supply a username when creating an account. The database will actually enforce that and ensure that every single account that's added to this database has a username, and it cannot remove the username at any point. I'm also going to say that the password must also not be null as well. I actually think that each one of these is basically required. So one other thing too, primary key implies not null in Postgres. Obviously, if you're using a different database, look that up. But in Postgres, using primary key, you're saying it must also not be null as well. Another constraint that we can add is unique. And what this does is ensures that every single account has a unique username. I actually don't think anything else should have unique. It is possible that two users might have the same password. We certainly don't want to let them know if a password's already taken, right? That actually would be kind of a security issue. Same thing with the first name or last name. It is actually possible that two people might have the same last name. It's possible that two people might have the same first name. So because of that, the unique constraint, I think, should only go on the username. If you have an email, you might want to also put unique on the email as well. I think that this table is good. Let's go ahead and highlight it. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch our database down here at the bottom. So instead of Postgres, we'll go to productivity. And you might think, well, we already did that, right? We keep switching the database. The database down here is based on what file you're using. So each file has its own database that's using. Let's come in here, we'll right click and we'll run query. And if you see null rows created, then it created that table in our database. Next, we're going to set the user permission of that user account that we created earlier. We're actually going to grant permission for the productivity account in Postgres to make modifications to this table. The standard SQL statements are select, insert, update, and delete. And we want to allow this productivity one to do all of those things. Let's go ahead and similarly run this query, and perfect, we've done that. This may seem a little redundant, but what you're doing is you're creating an account that has limited access to your entire database server, and it only has access to this table account or any other tables that we specify. By default, the Postgres account has access over everything. If you can, you want to prevent using the Postgres user for all of that. Next, to actually add an account, we run a statement that's similar to this. We're not going to encrypt, this is just for demonstration purposes. We'll get rid of this later. But this is the statement that we do that. The username is here. Then the next column, right, password is here. First name, here. Last name, here. The only one we didn't specify is the ID. The database will actually give us a unique identifier. We don't have to type that in there. Let's come in here and we'll right click it and we'll run this query. And it'll say one row inserted if it worked correctly. To get the data from our database, we use a select statement. So we're selecting the columns that we want. We want all of these things from this table. So the account table. Let's come in here, we'll run this, and let's make a little bit more sense here later. Yeah, so it gives us, so take a look at the statement here. The statement returned this table. So ID we have over here, username we have over here, password we have over here, etc. And we have one user inside of this table. This is the username, password, first name, and last name. Later on in these videos, again, we'll encrypt the password. So now what we can do is, I want to show you, in order to insert another account in, you actually can just copy this. And let's come in here and we'll create another account. So you can create another account this way. And I want to show you one other thing. You can come in here. You can also add multiple users in the same insert statement. So check this out. So for each one of them, you do parentheses like this, then a comma, and then another set of parentheses, and then a comma, right? And just however many you have. So instead of just doing one, I'm doing 3. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to run this and right click. It'll just say, okay, I did it. It's not going to actually show you for performance reasons. The database is just like, okay, I did it. If you want to actually see what happened, you have to rerun the select statement. So we'll come in here, we'll run this, and there we go. Now we have a bunch of people in there. Now what often happens that I've seen when I've been tutoring students in this is they say, oh, I need to change something. So they'll come in here and they'll just change it in this insert statement. They'll be like, oh, I meant to make her name Amy Smith instead, right? So they'll come in there and they'll just like, okay, I can rerun it or whatever. Oh, it's stupid. What? I don't understand. You're actually adding another account. You're not changing that original one. So we have a statement that we can change the account with. We can change the account with an update statement. Let me show you something real quick. So if I run this, take a look. So we've got the ID of 1 on this someone, right? We want to change this person's first name. So we're going to come in here. The ID is 1. So we say update the account table. We're going to set this column to Amy where the ID is 1. This is super important. Very, very important. Because otherwise, if you don't have this sets everything to every single person's first name to Amy. So super important that we have this. We're going to come in here. We're going to run this. Run query. And yeah, it says 1 row updated. Now we can come in here and we can run the select statement again. And there we go. Now Amy is changed. You might notice the IDs are not in order anymore. That's okay. Nothing changed. It's just that it's now in a different order now. And Amy's now down here. But if you want to see them in order, let's go to our select statement. In our select statement, right after the T here, we can come in here and we can say order by ID. And you can order by anything. You can order by the username, order by the password, order by the first name, whichever. Let's come in here, we'll run this. And there we go. Now it sorts everybody by the ID. If, for example, I wanted to sort by the first names, I could come in here and say first name. I'll close this. So I could change this instead of ID, I could say first name instead. And I could come in here and I could run this. And there we go. And you might notice the IDs are not in order anymore. It's 1, 4, 2, 3 because Emily, right, is higher up in, but it is sorting the first names. You can also do the opposite. Like if you want Z to A, you can do descending and run that. And there we go. Now Mark is the first one, and then Amy, because she has an A, she's now at the very end. This is one of the things that's really powerful about SQL is you can basically just ask for what you want and how you want as well. So let's say that we're removing a user. So our standard, we granted all these different commands that we can do, right? These are the 4 kind of main commands that you need to know when you're learning SQL. Select, which gets something, insert, which adds something, update, which changes something in the database. But we haven't covered delete yet, so let's do that. Delete is actually quite similar to update. Let's say that we want to delete Amy now, right? We'll delete from account. Now, super important, we do a where. And this says, okay, which accounts do you want me to delete? ID equals 1, which should just get one ID. Let's select this again just so you can see what's going on. So we have all these accounts. So remember this one right here because this account's not going to be there for very long. Let's come in here, we'll run delete. And there we go. Again, it just says one row deleted. It just said, okay, I did it. And let's come in here, we'll run our select statement again. And there we go. And now we only have 3 entries in our database now. One of the benefits of SQL is that it's very fast and performant. Another benefit of it is that it's very organized. It's not like the files on your computer where everything might, you might have all these different files and they're of different types and, it's a lot more loose. Databases are a lot more structured and they allow you to sort of ensure that data appears a certain way. It's a bit more strict, and because of that, it can be faster, and it can also ensure that data is stored correctly and the way that you intend it to be. I think that about wraps it up for this video on an introduction to Postgres. The idea is that we're going to have our SQL statements be run by our JavaScript instead. When somebody creates an account, it's going to run this inserts into statement. When somebody logs into the account, we're going to get the password and see if they match, and if they do, we'll log them in. If somebody wants to update their username or their password, you run an update statement. And if somebody wants to delete their account, they can delete their account. There's much more to SQL. We just scratched the surface, but I hope this gets you started. We're going to be making lots of more tables in this series. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.